past, lately the Memphis Opera Company, and will be performing with our Kentucky Opera this fall in the Magic Flute. Robert E. Lee, assistant organist at St. Francis of the Fields Episcopal Church, will accompany Gabriella as she performs Giacomo Puccini's O mio babbino caro.
Louisville's MBA program, and they become an honorary Rotarian for 3 years. We give them a Rotarian mentor from the club, and they also get a $5,000 award. At the end of the 3 years, they're offered a full membership into Rotary. And one thing I'd like to say that all of the former fellows that have ended up staying in Rotary, every single one has served as a committee chair, a club director, or a club officer. So I think that really shows the impact of this program, and it also shows the caliber of people that we're selecting for this program. So I do want to recognize a few people that make this program work and keep it going. First off, our help from the University of Louisville, Laurie Pardue. Laurie is so instrumental in helping us do everything with all the students there. So she organizes opportunities for us to come speak to them, sets up all of the applications, the interviews, takes care of us. And Laurie, we couldn't do it all without your help, so thank you so much. Also, Rotarians and former fellows in the program, Brian Vieneman, Emily Hart, Amy Johnson, Chris Teeley, Ashley Brower, Barbara Langford, all of them have contributed so much to this program and keep it going, and I appreciate all of their help. Also, a special thanks to Mac McClure. I don't know, I didn't see Mac in here. Mac has been a champion of this program and has been involved with it since its inception in working with Baylor, setting this whole thing up, so it's a big help to him. Also, a thank you to anyone out there that's been a mentor. Mentors are so vital to this program. Carl Thomas was my mentor, and that was absolutely fantastic, and it helped change so much of my career. And that's really vital to this program. So if anybody's out there is interested in being a mentor to any of our fellows, come find me after the meeting. I'll be at the What is Rotary table, and I would love to help you get matched up with some of our folks. Now I want to introduce our fellows. So first off, our newest fellows that we have, Taylor Davis and Brianna Roberts. You'll start seeing them at meetings. They're right over here. Also our current fellows, Mike Solak, Krista Manning, Sam Jones, and Samantha Roney. Sam's actually stuck in some traffic, and Samantha's on vacation. Oh, there he is right back there. So made it through. Samantha's on vacation. And now our two graduating fellows are going to say a couple words on what their experience in this program was. And the first thing I want to say is these two people that are going to speak to you have been two of the best representatives we've had at this program, and I'm proud to say that I have both of their applications and they're going to stay on as full-time Rotarians. So with that said, here comes Maggie Galloway and Elizabeth Strell.
Rotarians, it has been an honor to be with you for the last 3 years. The time has gone by incredibly fast, but it has had a significant and lasting impact on my life. I've been truly blessed to have two incredible mentors. Henry Keene, who served as my mentor for the first 2 years, and I'm not exactly sure that Henry knew what he was getting himself into when he signed up to be my mentor. After about a year of sharing his leadership experience and his level-headed perspective, I somehow persuaded him to join the board of my company. And he has dedicated countless hours to my success as a business leader and the success of our emerging company. And so when I heard that Maggie Harlow had become a new Rotarian, I immediately put a bug in the Rotary Fellow Committee's ear to see if she could be my next mentor. And Maggie is one of the fiercest businesswomen and one of the most generous community leaders that I have known, and I've grown so much under her mentorship. So thank you, Henry and Maggie, for dedicating so much of your valuable time to growing my skills as a servant leader. The weekly Rotary speakers and the fellow meeting speakers have been a highlight of my experience with the Rotary Club. I have loved being sort of in the know about the top issues in our city and learning about those issues directly from the most important community leaders. Thank you to the Rotary Leadership Fellow Committee and my fellow Rotary Fellows for making the last 3 years a meaningful experience for me. And the great thing about today is that unlike a typical graduation where you leave one experience and go on to the next, I have the opportunity to join you all as Rotarians through the Young Professional Membership. And so thank you for welcoming me so warmly over the last 3 years, and congratulations to Taylor and Brianna. You are in for a wonderful experience.
How many of you think 3 years is a long time? I did when I was sitting at that table 3 years ago, thinking about being a fellow. At that time, I felt pretty good about myself. I just graduated with my MBA, and I got a new job at Humana in their mergers and acquisitions department. So being a fellow was like the icing on the cake. And then it happened. 1 month later, Humana announced that they were selling to Aetna. Yeah, and I panicked, and I began to question my career at Humana as well as my future in the city of Louisville. And so I took that chance to get involved in Rotary, and here are the 3 experiences that I had that had the biggest impact on my time here. The Rotary Promise Scholarship Program. Last year, I mentored at Iroquois High School, and the first day, I sat next to this young freshman girl who was incredibly shy. Walt asked her to answer a question, and she refused. She turned away, praying that she just would disappear, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is gonna be a lot of work. 2 meetings later, Walt started the class asking everyone, well, what did we learn last time? And she was the first person to raise her hand. And that's when it hit me. We're teaching these simple skills of how to have a firm handshake, how to make eye contact. But those are skills they need to be successful. And at the end of the day, just us giving an hour of our time really shows that we care about them, and that instills confidence. That same year, Rick Harned encouraged me to be on the Rotaract committee. Again, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, and while Rotaract itself ended up not being successful, I got 2 big experiences out of that. I got to know Scott Herman. If you don't know Scott, he is a young professional in this community that is going to be a leader here one day. And then I also got experience advising in strategy, which when you think of me as a young professional, I've learned at U of L, how to develop a strategy. We practice doing that. In my job and doing deals, I work on executing strategy, but I've never been in a role when I can help advise a group on how to develop a strategy, and that's really meaningful to me as I think about growing in my career. And last but not least, the mentoring program. And so since high school, the message has been loud and clear that you need a mentor in order to be successful. But formal mentorship programs are few and far between. Humana is just now in the process of developing its own. So I applied to the Rotary Fellowship Program mainly because of the mentoring aspect. And like Maggie, I thought about my time here, and I knew I had great mentors that I could have had each of them for the entire 3 years, but I wanted a broad experience. And I wanted to get to know someone with experience in healthcare, someone who had experience doing what I'm doing, so corporate development, business development, and someone in the arts, since that's always been a hobby of mine. So my first mentor was Susan Smith. And if you know Susan, she very clearly saw this like Aetna deal hanging over me, and she said, well, you need to build your network. And instead of telling me what to do, she encouraged me to get involved. So she encouraged me to read the invocation at Rotary when we had the mayor in town. She asked me to facilitate a table discussion at the annual district Rotary meeting on how to get millennials involved in your Rotary Club. And then lastly, she asked me to get to know her board at Guardia Care by helping plan their Chocolate Dreams annual fundraiser. The next year, I had Barbara Langford, and Barbara and I, so I'll say Susan and I found we were both foodies, so we would always meet over lunch at new restaurants. Barbara and I found that we did our best conversation drinking wine at Mesh, and we had some great conversations. And while I really thought I would learn, is corporate development what I want to do, what I got most out of Barbara was she operates in a group very similar to mine, where she's often the only female in the room. And I never realized what an impact that would have on me, and so she was able to give me advice on how to operate in that environment. And lastly, my current mentor is Kristen Boone from Fund for the Arts. We're still getting to know each other, but she's already helping me develop a plan when I think through, well, what is my next career step going to be? She's helping me figure out, well, how am I going to be intentional about my next step and what I want to do? So lastly, fellows, take advantage of this time. If you invest some time, you're going to get big rewards on your experience here. And President Tony, past Presidents Alice and Greg Braun, and all of the Rotarians, thank you for your support of the Rotary Fellows Program. I encourage you to consider mentoring. It's only an hour a month, and they're not going to match you up with anyone. They're going to match you up with a fellow who has expressed interest in learning from someone with your experience and skill set. And I'm excited to announce that I'll be joining Rotary, and I couldn't say that without the Fellows Program. Thank you.
Those that are new as fellows, those who are grads, and anyone in the room that at one time has been one of our Rotary Leadership Fellows, would you please stand now so that we can acknowledge you together? Mentors, please stand too. And Jim, thank you in your remarks for remembering Baylor Landrum, who remains a giant in this community. His influences on so many of us are felt. Now it's time for shouts out. Well, last weekend was our District 6710 District Conference in Paducah, and today we congratulate these Rotarians for distinctions. First of all, District 6710 Rotarian of the Year is Mr. Mike Kuhl. Mike, would you please stand? Congratulations. Members of the Lifeline Committee, would you please stand? Because we have for you the District 6710 Best Community Service Project for the Life Change Project held at the Louisville Rescue Mission. Congratulations, and thank you for representing our club so well. And Elizabeth, you mentioned the mentoring and the power of mentoring, not just of our fellows, but certainly at Iroquois and Western. Well, if you are involved with the Rotary Promise Scholars Program, and if you are a mentor, would you please stand? District 6710 Best Youth Service Project, Rotary Promise Scholarship Mentoring Program. Congratulations to all of you. Congratulations to Walt Kunau, who's traveling. He's in New York City visiting his daughter. Well done. Excellent work. Now, as we did last week, we are going to introduce some more of our Paul Harris Fellowship pin recipients. President-elect Barry Barker is going to assist. First of all, we have 3 Paul Harris Fellows who are new Fellows, and they are, if you'll come forward please, Marissa Neal, and Cynthia Napek. Leanne will get to you in a moment, and yes, we are going to all stand Paul Harris Fellows in just a moment. And we have some who are receiving plus pins. Paul Bickle. Tony Coffey. Dr. Tony Newberry. And Dr. Maynard Stetton. Contributions which you have made to the Rotary Foundation or contributions made in your name have advanced world peace, have helped us to continue to transform our world one individual at a time. All Paul Harris Fellows, would you please stand? Thank you for your service on behalf of Rotary International. Thank you all. And Leanne Parker, would you please come forth? Leanne, too, is a Paul Harris Fellow, and we thank you. Paul Harris Fellows, would you please stand once again, please? Leanne is also one of our new members, and as we have done recently, we want to welcome our new members and introduce them once again to the club. Leanne is from Louisville, 2 girls. Kylie, 27, is an attorney at Middleton and Reitlinger, and Delaney, 22, who just started her first job out of college. Congratulations. She has 4 cherished dogs and loves doing anything outside, biking, hiking, kayaking, boating. Leanne worked for Xerox out of college for 13 years and then did 20 plus years in medical sales. I like how you put that in the email, did 20 plus years. She switched to Edward Jones 3.5 years ago. She finds it to be rewarding in helping people reach their life goals and helping them through adversity. Let's welcome to the club, Leanne Parker. And thank you, Paul Harris Fellows. I think it's fabulous that a spirit-filled man will now introduce a man who wishes to fill us all with spirits. Reverend I know. My wife did the same thing. Reverend Robin Jennings will introduce today's speaker, Julian Van Winkle.
Thank you, President Tony. It's a great honor to introduce to you, my fellow Rotarians, Julian P. Van Winkle III. The name alone is synonymous with fine bourbon whiskey, and Julian needs no introduction, at least for those of you who may be familiar with bourbon. Just asking a bartender or a waiter at a fancy restaurant for a pappy makes for a very, very expensive evening. Van Winkle bourbon whiskey is literally in another league. Now, it wasn't always like this for Julian. I go back with him some 40 years. I used to get a Christmas letter from him when he encouraged us to buy a case of Pappy, adding that a bottle would be a nice gift for a client or customer. As President Tony said, I'm a clergyman. I didn't know quite how to participate in this promotional deal. So I tucked the letter in my desk. True story. 35 years later, when I retired, I was cleaning out my desk, and I found Julian's letter. So, I placed an order immediately for a case of Pappy Reserve that was then listed in the 80s promotion for under $10 a bottle. It has aged since then, but it's also skyrocketed. How much? 1,000 in price. If you have to ask, you can't afford it, just let's say that. I sent the promotion letter to Julian. 2 days later, it came back where my good friend crossed a line through the promotional letter, writing only, "This is hilarious. Best of luck in your retirement. Julian." You see, my point is, not only is Van Winkle bourbon in another league, but our friend Julian, at least compared to the rest of us mere mortals, is in another league. In fact, you may have read recently, the only clergyman, at least that I know of, who has received a bottle of Pappy Reserve is the Pope. It's true. Julian is a recipient, however, and this is where I do want to make note of numerous awards. This is good for all of us, for Louisville, and certainly for Julian and his family. He's received at the Lincoln Center the James Beard Outstanding Wine and Spirits Award. He was made a fellow with Southern Foodways Alliance at Blackberry Farm. And most recently, in 2017, he was inducted as the 39th member into the Hall of Fame by Whiskey Magazine. Will you please now give a warm and, as President Tony said, a spirited welcome to my friend and to a man who truly is in another league, Julian Van Winkle.
Can I do this? Yes. Thank you, Robin. Once again, you've almost put me to sleep. Your pews are more comfortable than these chairs, so I didn't quite doze off. But thank you very much. I told you not to build me up because this is maybe going to be a letdown here. But I'm honored to be here. I have many friends in the audience. Please keep the heckling down to a minimum. I just thought I'd at least I'm not sure how exactly all this happened, but I thought I'd start with my grandfather, who was Julian P. Van Winkle Sr., and known as Pappy. One of his good friends gave him that name years ago, and that's the way he was known throughout the business. But I just realized by doing some ciphering at the table that my grandfather got in the business in 1893. Worked for Mr. William LaRue Weller here in Louisville, right on Main Street, as a salesman. 125 years ago this year, so that's kind of a nice round number. We should do some decanter or something honoring that, but I'd have to buy some whiskey somewhere to do that. But he became a salesman and worked his way up into the company, the Stitzel Distillery, which was down on Story Avenue now, across from one of their distilleries was across from Plumber Supply. The office building is still down there. Made the whiskey for the Weller Wholesale Company with their label on there a few days a year. And Pappy worked his way up into in the company. His route was northern Kentucky, horse and buggy, obviously back then. Would go out for weeks at a time. And he and Mr. Alex Farnsley and Mr. Stitzel merged, bought the company, and they eventually merged after Prohibition in 1933 to form the Stitzel Weller Distillery. And at that time, Pappy built along with his two partners, built the modern-day Stitzel-Weller distillery, opened it up Derby Day 1935 out in Shively, and that's Stitzel-Weller. And their brands were Old Fitzgerald, Rebel Yell. I bet you all had some of that in college, didn't you? Cabin Still and W.L. Weller were their main brands. They only made one formula, and that was wheated bourbon whiskey. When I say wheated bourbon whiskey, corn and wheat and malted barley versus corn and rye and malted barley, like most of the other bourbon recipes out there. So that is the brand that he made and promoted, and my dad worked for him before the war and also after the war. I've recently read a bunch of letters. There's some fellow doing a book on distillers that were in the war. And obviously my father was one of them, so we had to look through a bunch of letters, and he was wounded in the Philippines, or in New Guinea actually, and out of commission for a few months, and he was so upset about not being out there doing his thing with his men. But he also wrote a lot of letters back and forth to my mother, obviously, and his parents, but also Pappy. So he was doing business from Manila in the hospital bed, even when he was wounded. But after the war, I came back and worked for Pappy. And Mac McClure is my first cousin. Maybe y'all don't know that, but my dad's sister was Mac's mother, along with Mac's sister, Chenault Conway. So unfortunately, Mac couldn't be here today to heckle me a little bit, but he's still doing some forestry business over in West Virginia today. But Pappy and Dad ran the distillery together, along with Uncle King, who was Mac's dad, who was the treasurer of the company. And bourbon business was tough in the 50s and 60s. They had a great product. They knew it was good, but putting away whiskey for 10, 15, 20 years is a bad business plan. Not bad, but you need a lot of capital to keep that going. So unfortunately, Pappy passed away. The cigars and whiskey finally got the best of him at 91. But he passed away, still active in the distillery. He was opening the junk mail. My dad was sending him some junk mail so he could open it up. He'd come in for a few hours a day. But he passed away in 1965, and Dad operated the distillery and up until 1972. At that point, he was forced to sell because some stockholders' dividend check wasn't big enough, so he didn't want to sell, but he had to sell the distillery. So he sold Stitzel-Weller. He kept one brand, which is Old Van Winkle, which is what we're still selling today. And he was able to sell that whiskey, that label with some whiskey he bought back that he had made at Stitzel-Weller. So it was a way for him to get right back in the business, because it was his lifeblood. Been doing it his whole life, the only thing he ever did. So he kept at it. I joined him in 1977, and unfortunately only got to be with him for 4 years, because he passed away in 1981. So I was handed this whiskey business, which was struggling, and the bourbon business obviously wasn't great back then either. We sold whiskey in decanters. That was the best way to sell whiskey, because the liquid itself was not great as far as quality-wise. I mean, popularity-wise, but the quality was there. So we'd make up these decanters for schools and whatever to promote our product. So I somehow didn't get a paycheck very often, but kept the business going because I had faith in it. My dad had faith in it, but unfortunately, the stockholder situation forced him to get out of it as far as the original brands. But I hung in there because it's the only thing I knew how to do. My dad said, "Why don't you talk to some insurance people or some bankers, because this whole whiskey thing may not work out." And he was damn close, because it wasn't easy. It was kind of rough over there. My wife and I had a son, Preston, who works with me now. I grabbed him out of UK in 2001, the day after he graduated, and his 3 sisters. So we had 4 small children to keep going, but it was tough. But again, believed in it and knew we had a good product, and still pushing the recipe that my grandfather and dad promoted in those brands. Diageo owns our distillery now, our old distillery. The brands that they ended up with, they ended up selling them all. Diageo is a British brand owned company, and bourbon is a very specific thing. It's southern. It's kind of in your blood. Obviously, the Browns and the Shapiros and the local families here in the Samuels know about that. And it's hard to sell if you don't know how to sell it. So they ended up running all those 4 brands into the ground, and Buffalo Trace ended up with the W.O. Weller brand in 1996 or 99. So I bottled my own whiskey in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, bought a bottling house and a warehouse, and would buy barrels from a distillery. Most of them were Stitzel Weller, but back then you could buy barrels from almost any distillery because bourbon was not popular in the 80s and 90s. And a lot of people bought whiskey from all different distilleries to start a label. So Stitzel Weller was the one that I wanted to promote and enjoyed, so that's what I stuck with. Owned this bottling plant in Lawrenceburg until 2002 when I hooked up with Buffalo Trace Distillery. So we have a joint venture with them, and they make our whiskey for us to our formula, same formula as Weller. I'm sorry, that's why you can't find it anymore, because everybody thinks it's like the younger version of our whiskey. But that's what Mark Brown, the president, wanted us to do, was to promote Weller also. So we did a pretty good job on that. I can't even find it either, because that's what I want. That's what I want to buy. But they produce our whiskey for us to our formula, warehouse it, bottle it, and we have the use of their sales force. So that was 2002. We were selling 2,000 12-bottle cases back in the day. Today we're selling about 9,000. So we've increased production, but you still can't find the product. And people ask me, how did this happen? I don't really know, but it's a combination. I did take Econ 101. I did learn about one important thing: supply and demand. If you believe in something, and I did, and I do, and I knew it was good, and all of a sudden, we did get a good rating by the Beverage Tasting Institute in about 1996 with our 20-year-old. It got a 99 rating, which is the highest whiskey rating anybody ever got, any distiller ever got. That kind of put us on the map, and things kind of started at that point. As you all know, you see a wine that gets a really high rating, you've got to get that bottle of wine or that restaurant or whatever gets a nice rating. So that kind of drives people. That was kind of the start of it. And then if you get some famous chefs like Anthony Bourdain or Sean Brock from Charleston promoting your product, just talking about it, and it ends up in TV shows like Justified or NCIS or whatever it is, Miami, and it just shows up on television. And then it gets in a John Grisham book. And it's all these little bitty tiny things, just kind of just build. And I had a lot of help. You know, I didn't come up with the bottle design and the label design as far as the Pappy label I did, but the cognac style bottle I use was helpful from a friend in Covington, Kentucky, Gordon Hugh, who used to own the cork and bottle liquor store up there. That was his design. The 12-year-old label was kind of his idea. A friend in Sacramento that had that label style. So all these little things. I had a friend in New York who did my advertising for a while, who helped me as far as paying the money to go to the WSWA convention and building a little small study that looked like a study with a fake fireplace and a picture of Pappy over the mantel, and promoting the brand and the family. And all these little bitty tidbits eventually take off. But the biggest thing, if you all have a product, get people to try it, whether it be money or sales or candy or anything. Just get people to try it. If it's good and you believe in it, word of mouth will take over. And that's what happened with us. We did very little advertising. Word of mouth was great. We'd go to these whiskey shows, and people would file through, and you just give them a taste of it, and people would, I don't really drink bourbon. Well, try this. It's a little different, please. I had a bottle of Jim Beam when I was in college. I didn't like it. Well, probably shouldn't have had the whole bottle, maybe. Just I did the same thing. So we noticed that people did distinguish our whiskey from others. The wheated whiskey it's smoother, it's sweeter, it ages more gracefully, doesn't pick up all the wood, and I could go on forever on this sales pitch, but I'm not here to sell you one thing, so remember that. I'm not selling anything. This is not a sales pitch. This is just a very informative evening or morning. But just got them to try it, and it just kind of builds and builds and builds. And I knew I had arrived when I was in Costco last year, and the checkout lady said, "Are you Mr. Van Winkle?" He took to my card. "Hello, Mr. Van Winkle. I I'm a big fan of yours. And I saw Mind of a Chef, and you and Sean Brock were making Old Fashions. It's a PBS show. And so when the checkout lady at Costco recognizes you, you really arrived, I guess. So I always go by, I always check out through her lane whenever I go out there. But it's been quite a ride. Preston, my son, as I mentioned, he joined me, and he's a big part of our business. So we basically have an office here in Louisville. We go to the distillery in Frankfurt, and we taste barrels, which is a really tough job. If you're bored someday, come on down. I'll put you in line to do that. But we taste every barrel before we bottle it, because we just want to do that because we don't have that much to sell, but we want everything that we do put in a bottle to be under our standards. So that's we don't have sales meetings anymore. This is when I was trying to get Robin to buy whiskey. It was $10 a bottle or something. And I've still got that letter too. It's kind of, I think, a copy of it, and a couple of those. But it's a weird concept that we have something, people want to talk about it, write about it, and do a TV show about it, and we say, I'm sorry, we just don't want any more publicity right now because people are getting angry because we're promoting something we don't have. And the secondary market has been created, which is awful. We hate it. But it's what happens with supply and demand, and people have way too much money these days. You all have done too good a job at what you're doing, because they're willing to pay that exorbitant price on $1,000 or $3,000 for a bottle of whiskey, which is crazy. But we split $50 with Buffalo Trace. The other people make all the money, but it's good to have my three girls involved in the business also, in that they have this company called, I got to give them a plug or they'd be upset. They have a company called Pappy Co., which is right down here in town. Actually, we bought a building down in Nulu. That's, if you see an old beat-up building down there, it used to be A1 upholstery. That's me. But they're going to end up in there someday. But they have their Van Winkle brand hats and belts and great bourbon barrel-aged maple syrup and bourbon balls and glassware and all kind of cool stuff that they put out with our brand on it. So they're doing well with that. So the whole family is kind of involved in this. So it's been quite a ride. I can't still explain exactly what happened, but obviously we're very blessed and very lucky that it has happened. And if you all have any questions, I'd be glad to honor those or try to answer something. I know we're under a time constraint here, but okay. Thank you.
Yes, please approach the microphone if you have questions. I have one. The mayor has spoken often and certainly before our club about bourbonism. What's it like to be on the destination side of bourbonism, and what might be some stories of folks that have visited the distillery that would just blow our minds?
It is incredible. Buffalo Trace has done, I mean, I have a great partner. It's owned by Bill Goldring, one individual in New Orleans. Sazerac is the parent company, and they've done a hell of a job of that place. 15 years ago, it looked like it was about ready to fall down. They put a ton of money in it, and they're spending money on bourbon. They're investing in bourbon, billions of dollars. To see the people come through there, they had 400,000 people come through last year or something like that. It's crazy, but you know, it's amazing. People don't know how bourbon's made. I know a lot of people in the wine business. I've met them through this Southern Foodways Alliance deal that we had to go to Blackberry Farm that year and get that award. But no, but we actually go every year because I'm a fellow with that organization, but met tons of chefs. So we've gotten introduced to a lot of people who make wine, and they come to Kentucky and learn how to make bourbon. And actors and you know, famous chefs and so forth, getting escorting them around. So we're just really lucky and I say blessed to have such a popular business. This bubble's going to blow up, as all of them do someday, and we don't know when. But if it does blow up in the U.S., we have the whole rest of the world that is looking for bourbon whiskey from Kentucky. You can make bourbon anywhere, but 95% of it is made here in Kentucky, because that's obviously the main the waters here and the expertise is here. But it's just been a fun ride to see how popular it is. So we're so happy for the whole industry in Kentucky and Louisville, because the Fraser Museum is the start of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail now. So that's kind of cool.
Patrick?
Yes, sir.
You have alluded rightfully to the fact that it is very difficult to buy a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle. However, it seems to me that it's very common that if I go into a bar, there's a good chance I'll have some of your product on the shelf. Can you tell me what percentage of those 9,000 cases a year go to bars and restaurants? And I wouldn't be surprised if it was 100.
No, that's a good question, but I would, when we first started out, this is something else that really helped our brand and a small brand, because we got distributors around the country who were in the fine wine business, and they had their product in fine restaurants. And when you have a bottle of whiskey that you're trying to sell and get it, spread it around as far as possible to as many people as you can, you don't want it to sit in a liquor store where one guy will buy it and take it home and drink it with his family. If you put it in a bar, a restaurant, 25 people may be introduced to that same product. So percentage-wise, I'm not sure. It's probably, there's a ton of it that's sold on premise in restaurants, obviously, but I'd say at least 10 to 20% of it goes to the stores. But the restaurants do a good job. See, we allocate this whiskey once a year. It goes out in the fall every year. That's the time to look for it. But now people are kind of starting to delay that. Like Liquor Barn hasn't even released theirs yet, their fall allocation, a little bit of it, but we want it to be in the restaurants. But they'll buy the bottle in the fall and they'll take it down for a while, and then Derby comes around, they'll put it back on the shelf. So, which is when people really want to find our products and all the bourbons out there. So a lot of it is sold in the restaurants, and it's probably 80-20, I would say. 80%.
80% restaurants and bars?
No, I'd say 80%. Well, it's
I mean, the little Italian.
call the distributor. I don't know. But it's not completely even. I would say 75, 25, 80. I don't know. But the stores do get most of it. But the restaurants do a better job of hanging on to it and making it look like they've got it all year long. So because they've learned that trick.
Tom?
Julian, Tom Bonert.
My old neighbor from Indian Hills Trail back in the day, 1955.
There we go. Only 2 or 3 years ago.
You haven't aged.
Julian, I am a customer of yours, but it's awfully difficult to be a better customer, so regardless. I want to ask a question that may take too much time, but I really do not understand the difference in the ages, 8-year, 10-year, 12. Is there any simple way to break that down?
Among our ages of our whiskey?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All our whiskey is the same distillation. And what my dad and granddad found out at Stitzel Weller was if you age a whiskey for 4, 6 years, 8 years. I think Old Fitz was 6 back. The regular label was 6 years old. But eventually they put out an 8 and a 10 and a 12 and maybe a 15 in a limited basis. As I mentioned, something about wheated bourbon whiskey ages more gracefully. It doesn't pick up as much wood as a bourbon made with rye. It's like wheat bread versus rye grain. It's not as spicy. Wheat is a little smoother, so it doesn't accept all that wood. So our 10-year is our youngest, and then 12 again gets a little sweeter, a little smoother, and as you get older, you tend to get a lot more influence from the barrel. I would say that the barrel, we use white oak here in the bourbon business. You can use any oak tree, but white oak is the best. French oak is great, but they're $1,800 to $2,500 a barrel, so you can't use those. Bourbon barrels, white oak barrels are about $200 a barrel. But each year you're picking up more of that oak and getting more away from the white dog, corn, rough edges of new moonshine, I would call it a white dog, into a more sophisticated whiskey or liquid that has a lot of that barrel influence. The barrel is going to give our product 80 to 90% of its flavor because it's aged that long. But each year you get older, you get a little sweeter, then all of a sudden you get to something like the 20-year, and this sounds like a sales pitch, I'm sorry about this, but go to a restaurant and try it if you haven't. But the wood tends to filter a lot of the rough edges off the whiskey, so you can really taste these differences. So it seems like totally different whiskeys, these different ages, but they're all the same distillation, same stuff. It all comes out of one pipe. We just leave it in the warehouse longer to get a different flavor profile. Then when you get up to the 23-year-old, it's too woody for some, it's too woody for me on an everyday basis, but it's nice after dinner sipping whiskey. So it's something that's, you don't want that at 5 o'clock in the afternoon because it's got too much oak to it. But it really does change quite a bit as it gets older. Then at some point, you have this bell curve where it starts going like this, it gets too woody, and if your barrel's not empty, it's going to be really woody, and you lose all the sweetness, and the tannins take over, and it's been in there too long. And there's, we try not to do that. We kind of, 23 is our limit. There is older whiskey out there, but it's very dry and not quite as sweet as the younger stuff.
Thanks a lot.
Hope that worked.
Ken?
Ken Grossman. Julian, thank you for being here. I know Mac really did want to be here, and is sorry that he can't be here, and he helped to recruit you to come speak to us today.
He did indeed.
We appreciate you taking the time. I can feel your passion for what you do in your product, but for the uninitiated like myself, I'm curious, what is it that makes, other than a great marketing job, what is it that makes Pappy so special and different than other bourbons? And for a guy like me who doesn't really think he can afford a $2,000 bottle of bourbon, what out there would be most similar in product?
I think this mic quit working, didn't it? Oh, I got an appointment. Well, as I mentioned, I can't explain this whole Pappy phenomenon, but it was just a lot of people talk about it. It's got to be hyped. We've got to trademark the name and the picture and everything because we've got Pappy beer out there, Pappy wine, Pappy salt, Pappy apple cider. We have to, my lawyer's getting rich off of us because they have to send these guys cease and desist letters because the idea of this Pappy phenomenon has taken off. I can't explain it other than it just happened, and we had a lot of help through word of mouth. And this is when we talk to people and say, have you ever told anybody about our whiskey? And they said, oh yeah, I've told a bunch of people. Well, you created your own competition is what you did when you did that. So it's harder to find. When you say thousands of dollars for our bottle, our 10-year-old is $60 suggested retail, and that's what the liquor stores will pay, 35% below that roughly. Our 23-year-old is $275. So anything above that, they're a little bit greedy, I would say, these liquor store people. And a lot of this is on the internet. You can't legally sell alcohol without a license, so that just happens. This aftermarket is not my favorite thing, but we're trying to shut it down as much as we can, but we're very small people, and a whole lot of other stuff out there you got to worry about. Yes, sir.
Hi, Julian. Tracy Holliday. Actually, my question has to do with pricing. If you did learn about supply and demand, and if the secondary market is charging what they're charging, and I'm a little reluctant to ask this question because
Want me to charge more?
I know where. Yeah, why don't you charge more? You could obviously get it.
We could for a while, but this is going to stop someday. And I have been in the situation where back then it was National City would call me every 3 months looking for their interest payment on my loan with them. And I got tired of that. But too much supply is not a good thing. I've had a lot of that. And I had to throw a lot of those ceramic decanters in the dumpster because they weren't doing me any good. If we raise our prices about every 2 years, about 10% or whatever. We could charge a whole lot more for our product because people are getting it. But if this thing blows up, what you never want to do is have to lower your prices to sell something. That makes you look bad. Like your house is not that good if you've lowered the price. New price on my house. Oh boy, I'm advertising that in my front yard. That doesn't make any sense to me, but some people have to do that. But that's what we don't want to do. So we're being very conservative. We've raised our prices about 3 to 5%. I mean, our supply 3 to 5% every year. So I mentioned the 2,000 cases versus 9,000 cases now. 15 years later, we'll have 15,000 cases here. Hopefully, the next few years. Did that kind of help the pricing situation? We just don't want to go there because it'd be great for a while. We'd make a lot of money. We'd all have jet airplanes, and then we'd be selling them when this thing stops. So I'm a little worried about that. As I said, I have that nightmare that we've got too much juice.
Julian Van Winkle, thank you.
Thank you.
A fabulous and full meeting. Thanks everyone for being here. And before I adjourn, Dr. Joe Coots, happy birthday. Happy birthday to you, sir, and to all of our birthday celebrants. Our meeting is adjourned.